84 WHAS in the studio with Senator Rand Paul. In case you missed it, Senator Paul is going to announce his run for presidency on the show. Perhaps not today. I'll take it in 2012. Somebody suggests you wait until 2020 because you're an eye doctor, and then you can say 2020 Vision for America, which is kind of clever. I got to tell you, I kind of like that.
My wife would probably like that idea.
Yeah, I think it's very sporty. It's very sporty. Let's talk about the REINS Act for a second. Earlier in the show today, we were talking about a Board of Health in Bullitt County that passed a smoking ban. An unelected body passing a ban that obviously has a huge impact. The REINS Act is sort of designed to address that same thing that's been happening in Washington for decades now.
Well, there's a primary principle of representative government is that if you don't like what we're doing, you can unelect us. The problem with bureaucracy writing laws is that when the bureaucracy writes the laws, you have no recourse. You have no way of unelecting them. And the bureaucracies are growing by leaps and bounds. The bureaucracies in Washington are hundreds of thousands of people. And they write rules, like recently the EPA has said, oh, we're going to write rules on climate change or global warming. We're going to regulate greenhouse emissions. Whether Congress wants to or not, we're going to do it on our own. And that's particularly galling to most of us because we think that's what you elect representatives to do. So the REINS Act would say that any regulation that's written by bureaucrats that's going to cost the economy over $100 million has to automatically come back for a vote. And we think this has a chance of voting.
Who decides those cost measures? I mean, that's the devil's in the details. And who decides that this bill's only going to cost $99,999,999,
right,
so it doesn't meet that standard?
Yeah, and the thing is I wanted it to be the CBO versus the OMB. But everybody that was involved with writing this bill tells me that that has potential constitutional problems because the OMB is part of the executive branch, CBO is part of the congressional branch. So they were telling me because it would automatically nullify laws that don't come back and get voted on, that would look like that we've somehow...
Your power grab.
Yeah, and so we ended up compromising with the people who wrote the bill and saying, well, we'll let OMB do it. I still would prefer Congress actually be judging the cost of these regulations. But either way, it's a big step forward. This would be a way of actually taking power back from the bureaucrats and saying, you know what, you can't write laws. Congress should write the laws.
Let me play devil's advocate. That sounds like it's going to make the entire regulatory process incredibly cumbersome.
Well, I mean, it will have to come back, but it's only about 80 regulations that come back, 80 a year, because you have a $100 million threshold. In fact, I kind of would rather see 50 million threshold because I'd rather see 300 regulations come back. But I do think that the people want their representatives to vote on these things. They don't want unelected bureaucrats to write law.
Well, your budget, you put forth your budget, and I got a press release about it, and I read about your aggressive plan to balance the budget, and I thought to myself when I read it, I wonder if it just clunked to the ground like a lead balloon in the halls of Washington. What kind of response have you gotten on that?
Well, we've just released it recently, and we had Senator DeMint from South Carolina and Senator Lee from Utah endorsed it. So we have 3, and that's better than just 1. And we're still working on more. There have been many members who've come up to me, Republican conservatives, and saying, yeah, I want to do it, and I want to sign on with it, but I'm a little worried about saying that we would cut anything from the military. And that's the big compromise that conservatives will have to make, is that conservatives will have to understand that if you cut all non-military spending, you don't balance the budget. So you really have to look at the whole budget. If you're really for balancing the budget ever, you do have to look at military spending. And the thing to remember is we doubled military spending in the last 10 years. We went from about $280 billion up to $700 billion, so really more than doubled military spending. And there is ways that you can cut and not make our national defense weaker. I think the national defense is the most important thing we do in Washington. It is a constitutional function of government. But I think we can be leaner and meaner and have a great fighting military without just giving a blank check.
I always tell people that I have a great deal of faith in the men and women of our military to be able to make their operations leaner and meaner if allowed to do that. And it's come to my attention that a lot of the most bloated spending is on the defense appropriation side when it comes to new weapon systems that never come to fruition, or weapon systems that are funded for 3 years, but then the 4th year when they would be done, the funding is gone, so we've wasted all that money. I mean, do you have the opportunity to get that specific, or are you merely saying, look, we've got to cut this chunk of money, you guys figure it out?
Some of it's in large numbers at this point. You also have to realize we're the only office holder in all of Washington that's producing a budget other than the president. So it's a big undertaking. But even the president doesn't get a lot of times into the specific weapon systems. But I think there are some weapon systems that have been discussed that can be and already have been shelved. Unfortunately, some of them were built for 20 years, never really came into production, and then shelved after we spent hundreds of billions of dollars. So we do need to be wise about what we do. We need to look very carefully at what our goals are. I think we need a very mobile force that can go anywhere in the world at any point in time, but we really need to get away from having 100,000 troops on the ground. I think after 10 years we need to ask the Afghan soldiers to step up and patrol their cities.
Is that, you know, in the Senate, have you had any sort of, are you getting any feeling that that's where we're moving? I mean, we keep hearing about how, oh, it's the end of combat operations. Super great, but we still have a gazillion troops there.
I think it's inevitable that the debt crisis that is looming is going to get closer and closer, and people are going to eventually say, you know what, we will have to look at military spending, we will have to look at these unlimited you know, wars where we have troops there for 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. And I think we could have a much smaller presence. For example, if we did determine that to keep terrorists from reforming in Afghanistan, we had to leave some troops, we might be able to have 10,000 troops there on a base for a while, for several years, but not have them patrolling the streets. You'd have much less casualties. The Afghan soldiers would begin to absorb the casualties, and they would step up. They have to step up. We believe in individual responsibility as Republicans domestically. We need to also believe in individual responsibility for each country around the world.
Okay, Senator Rand Paul, I know you have another appointment this morning. I appreciate your time. And again, you want to make any announcements about the presidency now? You want to go ahead and throw that out there now?
Mandy, you'll be one of the first to hear.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that announcement will come on my little show. I'll take it. Senator Rand Paul, I appreciate your time today, sir.
Thank you.
Have a great day. We will be right back on 84 WH.